Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Jim Hoven, your host for the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast. And today I have a really special treat for not only you, but for me as well. I have our good friend, Troy Ergenbright, with us today. And he has such a wonderful story, such a great history in the world of professional and amateur sports. And so I'm excited to get his take on everything from his journey to some of the athletes he's met and that kind of thing. We're going to have some fun today. Troy, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to finally make some time to get in here with you guys.
You absolutely been working on this and talking about this for a while, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the way that the world has gone between, pandemics and shutdowns and all the rest of it, it feels good to be able to get back together. I'm sure you're seeing that too.
No, it really does, and I think it's been a challenging year for everyone involved, and for us to now be on the backside of this and kind of hopefully put a lot of this stuff in the rearview mirror and move forward, a lot of excitement. Excitement. I think there's going to be a little bit of recalibration for everyone, but I think once we find our footing, we'll be on a good path.
I agree. And while we're talking about the pandemic, I would be interested to know from your perspective, because at the time when all of this started, which is over a year ago now, you were in the professional sports market, and I'm interested to get your take on how did that environment of the shutdown affect the groups that you were working with? Because some people listening to this may have their own small business and they know how it affected them. Some people may be working for a company and either they got laid off or they work from home. But what was it like for these kind of teams that the rest of us think like, oh, they're so deep pockets, it probably didn't do anything? What was it like from that perspective?
No, great question. And I think the biggest challenge that this past year in the pandemic brought was the unknown. And the unknown being we didn't know any specifics about this virus. And as science and doctors were trying to learn of it and learn about it and how to contain it and how to manage it, how does that affect entertainment? How does that affect sports? Because at any arena, any stadium, not only do you want to provide a great show and a great athletic spectacle, but you also want to have safety. And what safeguards, what guardrails need to be put in place to maintain that safety? And I think it was a little bit of a short runway for a lot of professional leagues because the start of the season was right around the corner. The NBA was right in the middle of the corner. And ironically, I was watching that game when Rudy Gobert literally tested positive on the court, and they shut everything down on the court and escorted players off the court, got the coaches off the court, evacuated the arena. So it was a big challenge, and I think a lot of professional sports around the globe, they faced this adversity and they had to decipher it and plan their next steps carefully to not only maintain fan safety, but also to help revenue come in to keep them moving forward.
And I'm sure that affected different sports differently. Like I know you worked with the NBA, NHL stuff. You worked with the Denver Broncos here. You worked with the Outlaws, which, you and I have been partnership in that on a sponsorship level. And so some of these teams that, I know we had our Outlaws sponsorship package because we're big fans of lacrosse and of the local teams here. And none of the games were here. Like, we paid for a sponsorship package where none of our own fans could see it, and they all put them in a bubble back east, and everything had to get revamped. I'm sure that was hard on the admin folks in these box office groups and everything else.
No, you're absolutely right. It was a real quick turn. And there was also, you have arena sports and then you have outdoor stadiums. And at the time, the science pointed that outdoor air events were safer than indoor events. So right then and there, all the sports that were in arenas, they had one arm tied behind their back with maintaining that safety, but still providing a quality product, not only to their fans, but also to, their paying partners and their investors.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the MLL was a great example. They had to take an entire season, condense it down into 2 weeks, and put it into a bubble.
And that's the Major League Lacrosse. Major League Lacrosse group is the MLL that you're referring to.
Correct. Sorry about that. Major League Lacrosse. And they did their bubble out east to maintain player safety, minimal fan contact. But to your point, how does sponsorship get affected in that? How does the reach and the exposure, how is that impacted? And how do they make up that lost ground? And how do they support that? A lot of the answers, they weren't so clear. A lot of the times it came through digital components or it came through broadcasting components. How can we still capture some eyeballs, and how can we still remain relevant and have that exposure while keeping players' safety in mind? I think another great example was the NFL as they moved forward. They were in an outdoor stadium. To protect and maintain those sponsorships and those stakeholders, what they did was they took like that first lower bowl around the field, and they would put tarps up, and on those tarps would be their major sponsors and the major logos on there. So it was a great way to maintain that major exposure, still have that reach, while still providing a safe environment for the players and the coaching staff to compete so that the season could continue. It was important for the season to continue, I think, not only on the revenue side of things for the TV contracts that were in place, but I think it was also important for our country as a whole. I think sports is a very, it binds us together. I think sports is one of the only areas that you can kind of get into a heated debate with someone that's not on your sports team. If I'm a Broncos fan and you're a Raiders fan, you and I can argue and bicker back and forth and have fun with it. But if you go into politics and try to argue that, it can get a little muddy
and ugly.
So I think it was important. It was a quick turn. It was a big pivot for these sports. How can we do this safely? How can we maintain our stakeholders? And how can we still provide this entertainment and this sense of levity to our country during these unprecedented times?
Man, that was so good. Well said. So with that being the foundation of where our conversation is going, I want to rewind and go back to you as you're growing up, you're figuring out the direction you want to go in your life. How did you come to the decision that sports at whatever level was where you wanted to go? And then what was your first entree into that as a career?
Sure. No, great question. Growing up in Florida, I was just a wild little kid running around. My parents had their hands full. I was a ball of energy, was always outside. We were always playing basketball or surfing or skating or playing football, and just a real active kid. And like most youngsters, I would watch Monday Night Football with my dad or watch baseball games with my granddad. And, you start to develop your fan favorites and your heroes, and you start to follow that. So I think it was just a kind of an innate energy that I had. And I couldn't wait to start playing Little League Baseball and Little League Football. I think my best first memory was starting off in Little League Football. We had a great coach, and I think that's an important component, is having a great coach. A coach that teaches safety, not only that, but also makes it fun, but also educates you the correct way to play your sport. And I was fortunate enough to have that. Had a blast in Little League Football and couldn't wait to play high school football. And as I got into high school football, I also played rec league basketball, and it all kind of parlayed together nicely in high school, where I played football and basketball and wrestling. And springtime rolled around, and there was this sport called lacrosse. Never had heard of it, but once I got the stick in my hand, I couldn't put it down. I fell in love with it. It was a fast-paced game, lots of contact, lots of speed, lots of scoring. So I think someone that had a lot of high energy and had a high competitive level, it just dovetailed nicely.
Yeah.
And luckily for me, at that time, lacrosse, a lot of the top schools were really good colleges and universities. So I worked really hard on my studies, worked really hard, not just on the lacrosse field, but also on the football field and basketball court. And I think it's important as young athletes, you don't pigeonhole yourself into one sport.
And that's counterculture for right now, right? Because now you're seeing so many, the risk to reward ratio of what a lot of people see is, man, I got to get my kid in this one thing and be a specialist and go to all the camps and all the stuff all the time. You're saying, man, round out that human side, not only the experience, but the athlete side by different movements, different planes, different sticks, different handling, all of that.
Absolutely. I'm such a big proponent of doing multiple sports, doing multiple activities. If you pigeonhole yourself and all you do is play football year round, not only are you burning out your muscle memory, but you're also burning out your mental capacity. I think there's a lot of crossover between the different sports where you can kind of have some muscle confusion and have some freshness and some newness, not only with the physicality of it, but also the mentality of it. So I think that's good to really round out a young athlete. So I would highly recommend definitely at least doing multiple sports. It's okay to specialize and have your favorite sport and do your camps and do all that. But I think just like in anything in life, you have to have that good balance.
Oh, Troy, I agree with that. And I want to step back to something that you said a little bit ago about some of the coaches that you had in Little League and all that kind of thing. I can still remember the football coach I had from 6 years old up until I went to high school, because I was on one team and he went up with his kid who was on that team. So he and that coaching team, they grew up with us. And some of the lessons I was taught at 7 and 8 up through 12, I still remember. And my high school coach, I've literally called my high school coach in the last year and thanked him for the things he taught me. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, we remember as young athletes the lessons and the people. So getting your kids involved in sports is one thing. And to your thought of the different disciplines of sports, I really like what you're saying, because different sports lend themselves to different natural things as well, right? Like football, it's a different mentality than tennis, let's say, or golf. So if you play both of those sports, you're going to get different things from those coaches in the mental aspect, the physical, the endurance, grit, all of it's common, but you're going to hear it in different fashions. So I love what you're saying.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think sometimes parents fall in a trap where they want their kids to be the next full ride scholarship Division I athlete. They want their kid to be the next number 1 draft pick in the NFL. Listen, yes, training helps with that. Dedication helps with that. But a lot of it's luck too. And, I can speak from experience in the NFL will find you. If you have the prototypical body, if you have the prototypical athleticism, if you have the skill set for it, the NFL will come find you. You don't need to find the NFL.
That's a great point. Alfred Williams, who's a legend around these parts at CU and played with the Broncos in Super Bowl, he's radio host here, this, that. And he always said, he didn't start playing football. He was a band guy, and he didn't start playing football till I think either junior or senior year. But he's, 6'7", 6'8", huge man, super athletic, and he found his way.
Yeah.
So all the hard work. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and they were talking to Chris Bosh, and Chris Bosh started idolizing the Jordans and the the Birds and the Johnsons and all that stuff as he was a little guy, and he just figured that's what I'm supposed to do. Well, interestingly enough, the harder he worked, in 9th grade, he's getting recruited. Well, if you're that guy, then it's a matter of taking your talent to that degree. But for the rest of us, you can work as hard as you want, to your point, and there's only 500 players or whatever in the entire NFL out of the tens of thousands of high school and college ball players. So,
Well, and you bring up a great example with Chris Bosh. I mean, he hit the genetics lottery.
Yes.
You and I are nowhere near as tall as Chris Bosh. We can't jump as high as he can.
Yes.
But if we have the same competitive attitude, and we have the same competitive drive, and we can kind of glean that from his work ethic and incorporate it into our daily life and into what our goals are, now we're cooking with fire.
Absolutely, because now you're taking those same elements of success that drove him to where he is. Or like you look at LeBron, another example, when he put out a little social thing about his workouts and his trainer and all that a couple of years back. And when you look at the commitment and the dedication that he has to being great, plus the genetic lottery winner, that's something. But we've all won the lottery in some way, right? Like you've won the lottery in the ways you have, and the skills and the gifts you've been blessed with, and me the same. And if we take that discipline and that grit and connection to those gifts and present them to the world, we're going to get that same result in our own special way.
No, and I think that's a great point. I think that, really highlights strength finders.
Oh, yes. Love strength finders.
What is your strength? What are you good at? Now hone that, sharpen that skill, and really focus in on that. And what type of return can you get on that strength? And yes, there are weaknesses that we all carry, and it's important to realize that and recognize those weaknesses and possibly help those along, but also realize what your strength is and how can you use that to achieve your goals and to help those people around you.
I've heard that said in another way that I really connected with, and what you're saying, I am spot on with. John Maxwell, who's a leadership guru, right? He teaches and talks and preaches leadership all over the planet. And he says basically when you hire someone or when you look at yourself, you should look at your attitude and your aptitude. But your attitude you can control. So if you're on a scale of 10, you can make your attitude a 10. You just have to work on it. Your skill set, your natural ability, you're lucky to move it up, according to him, 2 points on the scale. So for like me doing tech work, computer work, anything like that, if I rated myself as a 3, I'm not going to get to a 10 because it's not in my natural skill set compared to other things that I might be gifted at a 7 or 8. So to put all my time trying to make a 3 and 8 is a really bad use of energy and resources versus letting the 7s and 8s in those areas get to 8s and 9s and me working my strength area. So I love what you're talking about there.
Right. No, agree with that. And I think also attitude's a big part of it. And, how do you unpack someone's attitude? How do you see who they truly are and what their real motivations are? I think the simple answer is throw some adversity at them. How do they act when adversity hits? How do they act when they have a complex situation that arises? And, to what degree is that adversity? How do they handle it? How do they navigate that? How do they come out? Not only that, but, this might sound a little woo-woo, but what is their energy like as they're going through that? And how does that affect the people around them? And that translates into a locker room of any professional sports team, which also translates into an office of any professional organization. When you have people in your business or in your team or in your office or in your locker room and they're going through adversity, what is their energy like? What is their attitude like? How do they move forward? How do they direct that?
Well, I got to ask you this question that just fired into my mind. One of our guests last year during the pandemic was John Grant Jr., who, for people who are lacrosse fans, they know that's like the Peyton Manning of that sport. For those that are listening that are not lacrosse fans, you're like, John who? Let me tell you, he's the Peyton Manning of that sport. And so he was kind enough to come on this very show. Now, of course, we weren't doing it like this. He was at his home and doing all that kind of stuff. And when you talk about adversity, this guy loved the game so much. He was a player coach last season. His knees were bad and he was hobbling around, but he just wanted to go one more year. And then he was going to look at coaching at one of the big universities. You spent time with him, right? Is he the example of what you're talking about, of a guy that had that grit and had that attitude and that never say die, and you live for the game and your team in the locker room under adversity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be respectful of his medical privacy, but his knee injury was a lot more severe. He had some major surgeries on his knees and had a major complication with his knee. And I'm sure he doesn't like to relive that experience a lot, but you talk about going through adversity. He went through physical adversity, mental adversity, never complained about it, rehabbed, got it back, and actually stepped back on the field of Major League Lacrosse in an Outlaws uniform and set the all-time goal-scoring record in Major League Lacrosse history. So you talk about not only the genetic but mental lottery. John Grant Jr. brought that size. He brought that stick skill that he worked on and practiced his entire life, and also had that mentality of a champion to really push through not only his own adversity, but the team's as well. He would take the team's adversity on his back and get the team in the locker room through tough situations. So you talk about a true, consummate leader, both in the locker room and on the field, and someone that's seen his share of adversity. That's John Grant Jr.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So how many sports have you been involved with at either the collegiate or professional level?
Sure. So in college, I played lacrosse. In the professional level, was fortunate enough, right out of grad school, I was with a small sports marketing boutique agency, and one of our clients was Billie Jean King and World Team Tennis and the Chris Everett Tennis Charity Classic. And that was just a fun time, just a great group of folks to be around. Billie Jean King, very inspirational in what she's accomplished in her time.
Absolutely.
And, from what she did in her professional days, she launched World Team Tennis. And World Team Tennis, for those that probably aren't familiar, it's a mixed doubles format. So it really kind of brings both men and women on the same court in a competitive atmosphere to compete to win. Great format, pretty good, significant fan base across the country, does really well. It was great to be a part of. After World Team Tennis, was in TV for quite a bit, and then was lucky enough to got on with Kroenke Sports. Worked with the Colorado Rapids, which is Major League Soccer, Colorado Mammoth, which is National Lacrosse League Indoor Lacrosse, and then, of course, the Denver Nuggets, NBA, and Colorado Avalanche of the NHL. Then after kind of spending some time there, I had the opportunity to take the helm with the Denver Outlaws, which is outdoor professional lacrosse with Major League Lacrosse, and went over there and we won a championship my first year over there. So I was lucky to be a part of an organization that had great tradition, had solid roots, and just a roster that was packed with all-stars from top to bottom.
It was beautiful. That was our first connection. You actually got us connected with the Outlaws as you went there. We followed you and sponsored that team. And I remember watching, I got so, we had the connection of lacrosse, not that I played, but my son played starting in high school. So I fell in love with watching him.
Yep.
And then, of course, it led to the indoor game at the Mammoth, the outdoor game at the Outlaws, and winning that first year that we felt like we were part of it because we were your sponsor partners.
Yeah.
And when you brought the cup over and I was holding that thing, it was like 60 pounds or something. Like, it was stout. And I'm like, whoa, what a great thing. So congratulations for that team championship. That was a big deal here in the city.
No, I was really lucky to be a part of something that had deep roots and was the tradition and the history there was well established. So I was really fortunate enough to jump on board and help where I could. But the talent that we had in the front office and the talent that we had on the field and the coaching staff and the scouting, I mean, you talk about sacrifice and you talk about a competitive spirit. And the one thing that I really take away from that championship year was just the culture and the culture in the locker room and the culture on the roster. These guys had each other's back. They had a foxhole mentality. And, what I mean by that is when the bullets start flying and your back's against the wall, who do you want in your foxhole with you? And that roster, I mean, they linked arms. They were brothers in arms the entire way through the entire season and fought through adversity and losses. And, what they accomplished on the field was something special. And I was very fortunate to stand on the sidelines and watch it.
And I remember, man, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And it kind of takes me down the road of saying you've gotten to see some of the teams you were part of being super successful, and some of them struggle, and some of them weak and strong. If you look at the professional athlete in any sport, whether it's the NHL, NBA, NFL, lacrosse, whatever it might be, on the team's roster talent-wise, what would you say the difference is between the top team and the bottom team in the talent level? Is the top team 30% more talented than the bottom team, or is it finer than that? And then what separates and distinguishes that champion? You've talked about a few things already: foxhole mentality, how do you go through adversity together, the spirit. Have you seen any other common things that our teams, people that are part of a team listening to this, that they can draw from the arena of sports to take in?
Sure. I think all sports leagues and all professional sports are different, not only from a technical aspect with the number of players on the field, but if you're playing on a hard court, if you're playing on grass, or if you're playing on ice. But I think the consistent theme that kind of threads through everything is, do you have that one stud on your roster that is a fiery competitor and that has a special skill set and is just another level above everyone else around him? Now, does that special player, does he also have the mentality to get his teammates to rally around him? Do his teammates want to help and support? Do they want to fill in and do their specific roles and do their specific jobs? And not only do it, but do it well, and then do it at an exceptional level in the postseason. That seems to be a winning formula as you go into the postseason. If you look at the NFL and you look at football seasons, the quarterback, they touch the ball on every play. And if you look at the teams that have been in the Super Bowl and have had great success, look at their quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers, John Elway, Patrick Mahomes, they touch the ball every single play.
Right.
They're also great leaders in the locker room, and they're able to have a team buy into them and rally around them. So I think if you have that leader that's not only charismatic, but also has that skill set that's above everyone else, and everyone kind of fills in and does their job and does it on a consistent basis, you're going to have good things that happen. I think an example right now that's playing out beautifully in front of our eyes is the Colorado Avalanche.
Yes.
I mean, you look at Nathan MacKinnon, and I think he's the best player on the planet right now. And you look at, their second and third lines, their defense, everyone is stepping up in their roles, and they are playing exceptional. And I think when you watch Nathan MacKinnon out on the ice, his competitive fire, his spirit, his speed, it elevates everyone else's play. And it's almost that, that old saying, a high tide rises all ships. And I see that with Nathan MacKinnon in the Avalanche locker room right now.
Amen to that. Have you noticed other skills that leaders have besides the things that you've talked about? So whether it's their ability to remain calm or to discern a lot of information quickly or anything like that, because, and I think the reason that this is so well posed to you is because you've seen athletes in different sports, right? The baseball guys, their intensity level is there, but it's different than a football player or a hockey player's intensity or a basketball player. They're just all different. So what common characteristics of leadership do you see in these, like you say, these one or two super studs on teams?
Sure. Intensity might be different depending upon the sport, but I think the one variable that's constant is competitiveness. And a leader, successful leaders, that competitive attitude, it carries not only just on the field when they're playing or competing, but it also carries out when they're in the grocery store and they want to get in the shortest line, or they're taking a walk around the park and someone's walking faster than them and they want to walk faster than that person walking around. They have a switch in them that is a competitive switch that is always on and it's never off. And they want to beat you in not just basketball or football, but they want to beat you in life. They want to beat you in tic-tac-toe. They want to beat you in anything and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And now when you pair that with a calmness, and I think that calmness and that steadiness comes from their vision. And what is their vision? And their vision is in the future, right? The vision is the championship. The vision is crossing the finish line at the end of the season. And I think a perfect analogy for this is golf. Let's say you're teeing up a ball, right? And you've got the pin all the way, 200 yards down. Yes, you're aiming at the pin. That's the ultimate destination. To get a hole in one would be great. But where you really want to aim when you hit the ball is just a couple yards in front in that general direction. And when you do that, you get a clean shot off and you're still heading in that same direction to that ultimate goal. And that next shot, it's the same mentality. Aim a little bit, you know where the pin is, you know where the ultimate destination is, but can you aim just a little bit ahead of where the ball is and shoot it in that area? You might get a lucky bounce. You might get a good roll. The wind might play in your favor. So as long as you have that long runway of a mindset of where the goal is and taking those short steps to get on that track and get on that path, paired with a competitive attitude, you've got a strong leader.
Beautiful. So what about the silent leaders? Have you seen some of those guys, the guys that they grind, they work, they're not really outspoken, and the team falls on them more as a glue player, that they might even be an unspoken leader, but they're an influencer, which is a really good distinction, because the one who has the influence is the true leader, right? And some of them are more outgoing than others. Would you say, if you're talking to someone, I guess it's maybe a two-part question, the non-traditional alpha male leader, like what do those cats look like? And then on the other side, the importance of the role player. I think that it's really understated that you can have all the Tom Brady's and Aaron Rodgers that you want, but boy, if you don't have those role players blocking for them and catching the ball and the other things, then nothing works, right? So that's the beautiful symbiosis of sports, organizations, and life.
No, and I think what really underscores that is the communication, the non-communication or the verbal communication that leader has, and how they control that and how they navigate that. Because, as humans, we're organically based. We can see through stuff. We can see through fakeness. So if you have someone in there that is always yelling, always screaming, always trying to hype everybody up, is it real? Is it genuine? Is it organic? Are there moments where the leader maybe not saying anything at all is the right move, and maybe watching his actions? That's where you're going to get some real inspiration. Because sometimes the rah-rah person that's always yelling and screaming, it can land not only on deaf ears, but it can turn some people off too.
Great point.
So I think as a leader, you have to find that balance between communicating effectively and efficiently, and finding the right times to be verbal and finding the right times to be nonverbal. Instead of yelling and screaming, maybe show up to practice an hour early. So as everyone's pulling into the parking lot, you're out there running routes, or you're out there working on, X, Y, and Z.
That's so cool. What do you think with respect to the commonalities? Because again, you've been involved with multi-sport organizations. Is there a common theme among all these athletes, or are the athletes in the sports far different? Because if you're just looking at it from a generalization standpoint, the hockey players are seen as, gentle ruffians, if you will. Like, they play tough, they never complain, they never miss time, they're not prima donnas. That's how you see them. The NBA players you see more as the prima donna types. The golf players are snooty guys, right? And God forbid you talk about the rugby players and what those cats are like. So when you look at all this, have you noticed that to be true across that, or are they just good and, kind of sketch human personalities based like everybody else?
Sure. I think a lot of that comes back to the tradition of the sport and back to the roots of the sport. And when you enter a sport, whether it's basketball or hockey or football, you almost have to pay homage to the roots and the players and the athletes that came before you and the traditions that were set up in the past. And I think when you look at ice hockey, it's very tradition rich, and there's a lot of respect that goes on with ice hockey. So there is a little bit of a different mentality when those players hit the ice and when those players are in the locker room, as opposed to other sports. I think a big factor that also kind of is a juxtaposition to those traditions are salaries and money and agents. And where is that balance of me, and team, and dollar signs.
Yes.
Where is that intersection of, yes, I'm a professional athlete that I've trained my entire life and this is my livelihood and I want to make as much money as quickly as I can before my knee blows out or before I have a career-ending, injury. But to have success, you also have to be part of a successful team. As that team has success, you have success. So it's an interesting ecosystem between tradition, agents, money, and me versus team mentality.
What did you see and again, the reason this is so beautiful for you is, if I remember right, when I was looking at what these lacrosse players did, the lacrosse players were interesting to me because they had other jobs, right? They weren't just lacrosse players during the season. They had other jobs, and they didn't even, like the Outlaws team, they didn't necessarily all live in Denver and practice together every week. Like, they had a certain amount of time together. Then they would show up and there was chemistry there, and it looked like they played together all the time, but their salaries were much, much lower than, like fractions, not even 10% lower, like fractions of 10% lower than some of these other major sports. When you look at it, is there a difference in the personal brand building and personal brand recognition, like, the Troy brand or the Jim brand versus the Outlaws brand or the Avalanche brand? How did you see that going in the different sports of how they were trying to get theirs while helping the team?
Sure. And I think with lacrosse is it's a growing sport, and we see that played out in the NCAA's last weekend, where 4 of the games, 3 of them were overtime games, and you've got great universities that are having a lot of success in the field that don't have that tradition. High Point University is fielding a fantastically competitive team, and they're competing against the top traditional teams, the Syracuses, the Hopkins. So we're seeing that groundswell of love of the sport of lacrosse, and we're seeing it in the numbers, and it continues to increase year over year. And as the professional game grows and increases with that, I think we're going to see revenues from all sides of it start to increase and start to grow. But at the current moment, as we go down that growth pattern, these players are doing it for the love of the game. Not only the love of the game, but for playing in front of fans, and they're doing it for the love of their brother. They love that camaraderie, and they love to be on that team. And I think it goes back to what we spoke about earlier in this. These guys are competitors. These guys are professional athletes, and at their hearts, not only do they want to beat you on the field, but they want to beat you in tic-tac-toe. They want to beat you on cards on the flight back home. Like, they are competitors, and this is an opportunity in an arena where they can compete and they can let loose their energy and do it together as a team and succeed. So, yes, as the salaries kind of move north, as the leagues continue to grow with professional lacrosse, you're seeing a lot of these guys just do it for the love of their teammates and for the love of the sport.
That's so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see sports going in the next little bit? Now that we've come through, we're starting to open up things from the pandemic. Do you see them ever going back to how they were with respect to the concessions? I mean, obviously, there's going to be fans coming in again, and we had the good fortune of getting the MLB All-Star game here coming up in July, and they say, yeah, there's going to be no restrictions, full fare. Do you see that the players, because this was what I found interesting, in the NFL, I would think, and the NBA, I would think it'd be hard to have the same, not enthusiasm, because you're focused on the person that you're playing against and with, but there's something different when people are all over you, booing or cheering or whatever, with whether it's 10,000 or 110,000. What do you think that this whole thing looks like? And did any of the athletes talk to you about playing fanless, so to speak, and how that affected the game.
Yeah, I think anytime you're playing fanless, you can see it. The players are, and not to discredit their talents or their skill level by any means, but the energy is just not there. It's almost kind of like if you go to a theater performance and the actors are out there on stage and there's no one in the crowd. Yes, they're competing against each other. Yes, they're competing for an end goal, but the energy from the crowd and the excitement, that's what really fuels a lot of it as well too. So it was extremely difficult for these athletes to compete in empty arenas and empty stadiums. It was a challenge for them. And I think that's bearing out over time as now we're seeing stadiums and arenas start to increase their fan capacity. The players are loving it. They're feeling the energy. If they've got that extra, shift that they're on out on the ice and their legs are burning and the crowd is cheering, it gives them that extra adrenaline push. So
I agree.
I think they're seeing it. And to answer your first question, I think that as we all know, America is extremely resilient, and we've gone through a lot of stuff in our history, and I think this is nothing short of, exceptional. But as we see these rates go down, and as vaccines are widely available, and as we see restrictions loosen, I think there is a pent-up energy and there is a pent-up of emotion, not only to go to a ball game and have fun with your family, but to come together as Americans and to come together as sports fans and to celebrate and to see one another again and to enjoy those moments. So
I agree.
I think we're on the up track. I think we've got a little bit of ways to go. We're not completely out of the woods yet, but all signs on this road are pointing to pretty positive outcomes. And I think having the All-Star game here at Coors Field is going to be huge. I think it's going to be a great celebration, not only for the sport of baseball, but also for the city of Denver, both economically and for the fans. And from what I'm seeing and from what I've been told, it's been a measured approach, right? Because we want to make sure that fan safety is at the forefront. And a lot of that has kind of been helped with cashless options, with new air filters. And I know there's arguments, well, how much do they really help? How much do they not help? Well, I think everything's trending in the right direction and people are feeling safer and the numbers are coming out and they're showing that they are being safer.
Well, I will tell you this, I haven't played on a competitive athletic field in a long time. Most of the sports that I like to do, whether it's mountain biking or fly fishing or it's kind of with my buddies doing things we love to do. But this isn't a sport, but it goes to exactly what you're saying. Going to the grocery store, seeing people's faces again at the grocery store. We've ramped down what our restrictions are, and so a lot of the counties now say, you don't have to social distance, you don't have to wear masks. And so I'm all about that, right? So I love seeing now 40 or 50 or 60% of the people, their faces, whereas before I took it all for granted. Now it's like there's a whole human behind this mask. And so I can only imagine just how it makes me want to smile, how these athletes being able to play in front of their teams, or not just their team, but their fans. Mm-hmm. And it just raises everybody's energy. So I think, I'm really excited.
No, it does. And I think it kind of speaks to tribalism a little bit. We're social creatures. We want to be with our people. We want to be with our tribe. We want to be with, people that we recognize, and we want to be out in society. And, and I think in the back of our heads, it's almost like a social check-in. Like, okay, great. There's a stranger that's going about their lives and they're doing really well. It seems that they're doing great. And I think it adds to a collective consciousness of, we're heading down the right path. We're coming back.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. What do you see as being the next evolving sport that we might not know about? I know you've got your eye on all this. Is it lacrosse or is there something else? Because I remember, I played a lot of competitive volleyball through college and for several years after college. And I thought for sure that when the beach tour came up, it had its run and that it was going to be there to stay. And, it's still there, the pro beach tours and this kind of thing, but it's not like it was. Is there anything coming up that you're seeing as a sport for us to watch, or anyone that you're like, that one's kind of moving away from the trend?
Sure. First of all, I think Americans specifically, they have a huge appetite for sports.
Yes.
I mean, anytime you turn on ESPN, even if it's at 2 a.m. in the morning, you're seeing the beanbag toss competitions.
Right.
I think Major League Soccer, MLS, has had some great success over the last 15 years. I think you're seeing a lot of growth there. You're seeing a lot of athletes getting involved with the league, investing in teams. So it's exciting to see on the MLS front. I'm also very bullish on the Premier Lacrosse League. I think they're doing a wonderful job with social media outreach. They're doing a wonderful job handling and navigating social issues that we all are facing. I think they're also doing a great job with getting everyone under the tent and bringing everyone from youth lacrosse to, the guys that used to play in college and relive their glory days every Sunday in men's leagues. They're getting everyone back under the lacrosse tent again, and I think they're making some great strides.
Good. So lacrosse is the one to watch for. And
I have a personal bias, but
yeah.
I'm excited to see lacrosse grow, and I think the numbers speak to themselves. Youth lacrosse is a very booming business, not only here in Colorado, but just across the country. We're seeing a lot of competitive youth lacrosse, and a lot of colleges, more and more Division I and Division II programs are picking men's teams up and doing really well. I know University of Colorado, their women's lacrosse team did exceptional. They had a great year this season. So it's fun to see not the traditional hotbeds of lacrosse, but we're starting to see California, we're seeing Texas, we're seeing Missouri, we're seeing Florida, we're seeing Colorado. And I think when you have those empty markets where you can have growth, it's all bullish from there.
Absolutely. And like you said earlier, the tide lifts all boats, right? And so what we haven't talked about until you just mentioned it for the first time in the time we've been together is women's sports. So everything we talked about was, the male dominated teams, but I think that tide of leadership, championships, athleticism, grit, that has really poured into the women's game at every sport, at every level. Seeing what some of these female athletes are doing now is insane. And we've always seen the U.S. women's soccer team. They've kind of been the poster children for how to do it, but now even in mixed martial arts and in golf and we're just seeing these, and in even racing, we're seeing these women really step forward. I don't know how much into the women's sports arena with all your history that you've had, but is there a difference in the women's sports as far as how it affects the ladies and the culture and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. No, I think women's sports has always been in the landscape, and it's always been a competitive arena and a competitive atmosphere. And I think there's been a lot of great traditions and championships and success that have occurred in the women's arena. Right off the top, most recently, Simone Biles, and I know I'm going to mess this up, but she landed some type of impossible gymnastic move that has never been done before in competition.
That's recent?
That's recent, and she nailed it. Nailed the trick perfectly. And, I mean, you look at someone like Simone Biles, who is just an amazing athlete. I mean, she is a competitive athlete that has excelled at exceptional levels. You look at Serena Williams. I mean, what she's done on the court is just nothing short of, it's more than impressive. I mean, she's
legendary
by far.
Yes.
So to see the females compete and the success that they have and the growth of their sports, it's wonderful. It's great.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So as we bring this in for a close, I'm interested to ask you this. You've shared such in-depth wisdom on things such as leadership and connection and sticking it out and getting through adversity. Is there one piece of advice that you've been given from your time as whoever was your mentors or teachers, or something that you've learned along the way that you would feel, man, as just a core piece of advice, this is about as good as I've ever heard, that you would share with the listener, something that would that's had a big impact on you that you would want to pass along?
Sure. I think I've received a lot of great advice from my high school football coach all the way up to my college coach and even into business practices. And I think the one thing that I've done is kind of coalesced all those, thoughts or slogans together into, and this is kind of a two-parter, but you have to believe in yourself. And yes, not only believing in yourself, but you have to know and understand yourself. And I think that's an important part of it. So you have to know who you are, what you've accomplished, what you've learned, and you also have to realize what you still have to learn and what you still have to accomplish. And having that mindfulness to recognize your strengths while being aware of your weaknesses and combining that to sharpen who you are as a person to affect people around you, that's when you start seeing results.
That is magic.
Yeah.
So, final question. If someone was listening to this and either wanted to get into the sports life as far as, they're not going to be a pro athlete, but, either they're a young person and like, man, I just love sports. I want to be a sportscaster, or I want to be part of a team, or they want to change careers because their passion is sports. Is there any path that you would direct them on to kind of find their way on whether that's the right calling or not?
Sure. Every path is different, but getting into sports, it's tough. Everybody wants to be in sports, and there's not a lot of seats at the table. And so that path can be a pretty winding path, and it can take you to a lot of different places and to a lot of different levels. And those experiences, those might be the rewards. So whether you have that end goal to be the GM of a professional sports team, that's great to have that goal. But as you're walking that winding path, and as you're going through all those different levels, enjoy the experience and learn from the good experiences and learn from the bad experiences. But before you head into sports, you have to understand that it is a level of commitment and a level of sacrifice that typically is a lot asked more than any other profession. Well, I don't want to exclude medical professions or those that are important, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot.
Well, I'll tell you, you have given a lot, Troy. You've given us so much today. As you go through all the great things that you got going on in your life, know that you have a huge fan, not only in me, but in us at Ramos Law. We just love you. We appreciate you and all that you've done. And once again, you taking time to share this wisdom with us and everyone listening. Thank you for your time, and continued success to you, my friend.
No, thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here, and our friendship and partnership over the years has been very valuable. And this is a part of the journey to meet and form great friendships and partnerships with your team.
Here we go. Let's do it. Game on.